My name is Lisa McNiven, and I've brought in an 1802 ledger from Commissioner Inglefield, who was running the dockyard. I picked this artifact because it's a really interesting piece of early Halifax history, a very special gem of time that's been lost through history.
10 years following the settlement of Halifax in 1749, North America's first naval dockyard was built on the harbour's western shores. Already operating as a seasonal base, the yard's official commission provided Britain's North American station permanent headquarters during the 7 Years' War, the American Revolution, the French Revolutionary Wars, and the War of 1812. As the Royal Navy fortified across decades of conflict, the site quickly expanded to meet its needs. The British left in 1905, and in 1910 the dockyard was transferred to the Canadian government. The site was a major contributor to the Great War's Allied strategic defence until the collision of the SS Mont Blanc and SS Emo devastated the harbour. The Halifax Dockyard was designated a National Historic Site of Canada in 1923.
Hi Lisa, welcome to Militaria.
Thank you.
What do you have for us today?
I have a really interesting ledger from 1802 to about 1804, and I think it's a wonderful scope of the early history of Halifax and the Naval Dockyard in Halifax. And it was by a gentleman called John Inglefield. And John Inglefield was commissioner of the Halifax Dockyard. His ledger documents the day-to-day events that were happening in the Halifax Dockyard.
So from what I understand, Lisa, Inglefield, before he was a commissioner, he was a captain in the Royal Navy.
He was, and he joined the Royal Navy at a very young age of 11 in 1759. I guess you could say he was actually a naval career man. He had spent his entire life in the service. 1799, he was a captain, but he was put on the commissioner's list. In 1802, he arrives in Halifax, and he is the commissioner of His Majesty's Dockyard, Halifax Dockyard.
This one dockyard ledger has such an amazing breadth of history in regards to that legacy of people who served in the Navy and participate in the naval history that shapes our history today. Lisa, can you tell us a bit about Inglefield himself?
I do know that he had a family waiting for him in England. He had a son and a daughter, and this was his last commission before he retired. This was his last base.
And was that common that captains would retire and take up a commissioner's post either in Halifax, Bermuda, or anywhere else that the British were set up?
It was technically a vice admiral's commission, so a commissioner had a lot of scope, a lot of power, and it was given to captains that had retired, obviously, after years of service. Inglefield was a very precise individual. His notes are direct, and you would get a real sense of the day-to-day dealings he was also having to contend with in the dockyard. Everything from requisitioning to rope to human resource problems, who's getting fired. It's a real microcosm of Halifax and the administrative duties of a commissioner in a new naval dockyard. The requisition orders on Inglefield's ledger give an idea of what was a necessity to run a dockyard. They were looking for foodstuffs, they were looking for stationery supplies, they were looking for building supplies. It gives you a real idea of how many people these supplies were serving. It wasn't simply Navy, there was also a large civilian population working at the dockyard at the time.
So why would it be important for a museum to preserve the ledger?
There are so many interesting facts running through this. There's a reference to keeping the King's house at Tufts Cove. I haven't done any research on that. There are notes to the keepers at Dead Man's Island for requisitions for Napoleonic prisoner of war, requisitions for coal, for blankets, for keeping the prisoners warm. And it's also talking about the growth of Halifax and how the dockyard and the Navy are trying to keep up with this boom.
So as an archivist, this is a very valuable resource for anyone doing history in that early Halifax dockyard history and even the history of the Royal Navy being in North America and establishing their naval ports and their operations here.
Absolutely. It just needs a little more research, and I think it'll be certainly worth the effort.
There's always a possibility that there are other copies of the ledgers. I mean, this ledger would have been one of maybe like 100 plus ledgers. So if another ledger exists, we would definitely love to know about it. And what's also unique about this piece is the very dodgy history about how it survived through time.
Exactly.
Can you tell us a little bit about that history in regards to the ledger?
So the story that I've been given is that 1905, the British Navy leaves. They have a bonfire down at the dockyard, and if it's paper, it's being burnt. So there was a gentleman down at the dockyard. He's seeing this beautiful book in flames. Out of instinct, he kicks it out of the way, tucks it under his arm, and leaves through the gate and goes back into history for at least 100 years, where the book comes back to us through an ancestor of the gentleman that saved this beautiful document.
And what I find absolutely fascinating as well is that if you can see the darkening around the book itself, you can see that it was in the fire and that he actually pulled it from it and that it survived that. And the beautiful binding that exists on it now is not the original cover, but we had a conservator professionally conserve it so that we could keep this piece of history.
And it's so beautifully preserved, and it's legible because the conservator had told us that it had basically created a vacuum seal. So the fire singed the edges of the book, but it kept the contents pristine. And when you look at the lettering and the wording today, it was like he wrote it yesterday. It's just a perfect time capsule of naval history.
Between 1901 and 1905, the British Navy started to leave Halifax. So anything they didn't want to bring back to England with them, they either sold or disposed of. And so a lot of the ledgers and documents, they already had a copy of it in England. So why are we going to keep duplicates? So when this ledger was put into a fire, it wasn't a malicious intent. It was just, oh, okay, it's a copy, let's burn it, let's get everything cleaned up before we go. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for bringing this ledger from our collection. Currently, the ledger isn't on display at the museum. It's primarily used as a research resource. The reason why we don't put it on display is because even though it looks beautifully intact, like the day it was written, it is a fragile artifact. Artifacts such as this ledger are at risk of dehydration, over time becoming extremely brittle. So the more and more you handle it, the more at risk we put it. So unfortunately, we can't put it on display and actively talk about the ledger and let people see the ledger. We can at least use it as a historical reference to talk about the time period in which the ledger was created.
We want to keep it in pristine condition so that perhaps one day down the road we will have the resources to unlock some of its secrets.
So when you're preserving this in the archive, how would you wrap and pack this so that it was safe over time?
We have archive certified boxes, acid-free boxes. This gets wrapped in a piece of acid-free tissue, and the box is kept in controlled environment.
Lisa, thank you so much for bringing the ledger today. We have learned quite a bit from this ledger, and we can continue to learn from the ledger and that early history of the Halifax Dockyard. And I look forward to diving into the archives with you back at the museum and to explore more of this history.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. I think we're so lucky to have it in the house. It is one of our house gems, and I'm looking forward to more research and more information that it'll give up to us.